What could be more interesting than an Oz mystery? What, indeed? Why, I can almost hear you shout, 2 Oz mysteries. And here you have them in this newest Oz story. 2 very mysterious mysteries to solve and ponder over, and so many new kingdoms and characters, I can hardly remember the proper spelling for their names. You will be glad to know that Dorothy has most of the strange adventures in this book, and remember Pegasus? Well, I have long suspected Pegasus could be useful as well as poetical, and now that he has so convincingly proved his prowess, how do you like that word? We'll have to treat him with more respect and dignity. Your letters all year have been grand, and if I had the magic necklace mentioned in this story, one would wish you 365 days of happiness. But after all, I have a magic necklace. Each boy or girl who reads the Oz books is one shining link in the friendly chain that holds us together. All friends, and all for Oz. You believe in Oz, and I'll believe in you, Ho. That's the stuff that's strong enough to make my wish come true. So, happy year to you, dears. And next year... well, who knows what will happen next year? Another Oz book, maybe, if you still want one. Write me if you do, and best of everything wonderful to you all, always. Ellen 10, Schoolhouse Lane, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, 2. This book is dedicated with pride and affection, whose gallant and adventurous spirit sweeps like a freshening breeze through my life, touching it again and again with color, vigor, interest, and gaiety. To Mabel. 1. The King of Scampavia. 2. The King and the Merchant. 3. More about the emeralds. 4. The King and his talking horse. 5. A great celebration in Oz. 6. A strange warning. 7. What wizard? 8. Way for the Emperor. 9. The journey begins. 10. The Witch of the Black Forest. 11. Black Magic. 12. Farewell to the Black Forest. 13. In Calico's Castle. 14. The Emperor of Oz. 15. The Dooners. 16. The Seer of some Summit. 17. Scamperoo in Oz. 18. The Emperor's Horse Makes a Bargain. 19. The Story of the Necklaces. 20. Back in Scampavia. Chapter 1. The King of Scampavia. Is this all? The King of Scampavia frowned at the great stack of bags, bales, crates, and carriers heaped around his throne. Leaning forward, he gingerly extracted a fig from one of the baskets and popped it into his enormous mouth. "Pah, dry as a blotter," spluttered the red-faced ruler, gritting his teeth with disgust. "And look at those coconuts, no bigger round than a baby's rattle." Leaping off his throne, he began kicking at the baskets of vegetables and bales of cotton and other merchandise. "What dusty junk is this?" he raged, glaring furiously at Pinny Penny, his patient prime minister. "How dare they send me such stuff?" Clasping and unclasping his hands nervously, Pinny Penny nevertheless spoke up boldly. "Because they have nothing better, your majesty. What can our poor subjects do with land so unprofitable and barren? Then, not only must they produce enough for their own needs, but are required by the law to give 1/3 of all they raise to the crown." "And why not?" blustered Scamperoo, settling back argumentatively on his throne. "I am the king. You can't get around that, you know." "No," sighed Pinny Penny, and drawing aside one of the shabby curtains, he looked sorrowfully out into the courtyard. "What's all that racket?" demanded his master as a medley of shouts, roars, and dull thuds came rolling up to them. Forgetting his anger for a moment, he bounded to his feet and came across the room to look over Pennypenny's shoulder. "A slight argument seems to have arisen among the supervisors," murmured Pennypenny resignedly. "Now, Scampavia, I must tell you, is roughly divided into 7 counties, and over each county Scamperoo had set a supervisor whose duty it was to govern the province and to turn over to him 1/3 of all produce and merchandise in that county. To save time and easily identify them, the supervisors were known by the size of the counties they governed. For instance, the supervisor of the first county, which was 1 mile wide and 10 miles long, was called One Bighton, the supervisor of the second county 2 before, and the others were variously known as 3 by 6, 9 by 5, 8 by 8, 5 by 9, and 4 by 7. Twice a year the supervisors rode into the capital with their tribute, and now, down in the courtyard, the 7 tremendous Scampavians were in a perfect pitched battle, helped out by all the guards and palace servants. "Argument," roared the king, slapping Pennypenny rudely on the shoulder. "It's a fight, and you know it. Ho, ho, just look at the good-for-nothing rascals. I tell you, old Two-Pins, however poorly they serve us as farmers and merchants, our Scampavians can certainly fight. And who says I'm too hard on them? Have I not given every man Jack a dress uniform and gun, and made them learn military drilling and marching at the Royal College?" "And what use is all this drilling and marching?" inquired Pennypenny wearily. Letting the curtain fall, he hurried away, for well he knew, if he did not put a stop to the conflict in the courtyard, every window in the palace would be broken. "Now, what did he mean by that?" muttered Scamperoo peevishly as his little prime minister whisked out of sight. Pursing his lips, he seated himself heavily on his throne. After all, Pennypenny had only spoken the truth. Why had his father, or his father's father, ever picked out this pesky little country in the first place? Located in the southern part of the desert of Noland, between the kingdoms of Ix and Merryland, Scampavia, he was forced to admit, had neither riches, beauty, nor interest. His castle, though poor and shabby, was comfortable enough, and having lived in it all his life, he was used to it. He had put up with the hot, dry climate and the poor quality of the food, but after all, why should he continue to do so? In those long-ago days in the schoolroom he had studied of energetic rulers who had taken their armies and gone forth to conquer richer and more desirable lands from their neighbors. Well then, why should not he take his men, push over the border into a more fertile and kindly land? The idea pleased, but at the same time annoyed him. Scamperoo was fat and lazy. He loved quiet and ease, and the thought of a hard military campaign made him shudder with distaste. Still, he reflected, remembering Pennypenny's reproachful face, a king should do something for his subjects, and the more he did for them, ho, ho, the more he could make them do for him. A rich and prosperous country meant a rich and prosperous ruler. Discontentedly fingering the rough cloth from which his royal robes were fashioned, he began to picture himself decked out in splendid satins and velvets heavily encrusted with jewels. Jewels! Bah! All the jewels he had were his plain gold scepter, badly dented and bent from hurling at Pennypenny. Taking off the crown, he scowled at it critically and began considering the realms on either side of his own dominions. To the north there was nothing but a sandy strip of desert and the tossing waters of the Nonestic Ocean. East lay the kingdom of Ix, and Zixi the little queen he considered too pleasant and friendly to conquer. Besides, the climate of Ix was not much better than that of his own country. To the west of Scampavia was Merryland, and at one time a band of his roistering Scampavians had crossed over into that country bent on theft and mischief. Recalling the way they had been welcomed and entertained by the cheerful king of Merryland and sent home simply laden with presents, he hastily dismissed that country too. How could he fight a monarch like that? To the south lay the burning sands of the deadly desert, which no man in his own kingdom had ever succeeded in crossing. So, having exhausted all the possibilities in the immediate neighborhood, Scamperoo tapped his foot in vexation and began casting about in his mind for some fair and faraway country to conquer. He closed his eyes in order to think better, and was just on the point of falling into a pleasant doze of riches and conquest when Pinny Penny came noisily into the room. He was preceded by two of the king's supervisors who, urged forward by the fearless little prime minister, stood sulkily and defiantly before the throne. "Well, what now?" demanded Scamperoo, blinking his eyes sleepily. "Can you not handle these arguments yourself, Pinny Penny? Is a king to have no rest or privacy at all?" Instead of answering, Pinny Penny took a small cotton bag from the tallest of the supervisors and handed it silently to the king. Still half asleep, Scamperoo untied the drawstring of the small bag and emptied the contents into his fat hand. What he saw there made his eyes fly open, wide open. Jewels! The very thing for which he had been wishing. "Emeralds!" gasped the king, rubbing the glittering necklace between his fingers. "Where did you get this to before?" "They were sent to your majesty by a merchant in the second county, who got them from a traveling peddler. The peddler had got them from a Gillikin, who had got them from a Quadling, who had got them from a Munchkin, who had once lived in the Emerald City of Oz." "Oz!" snapped the king, sitting up very straight. "Where is Oz?" "Oz is a great and powerful kingdom on the other side of the deadly desert," answered Toby Four, looking uneasily over his shoulder at Pinny Penny. "Then how did this peddler cross the desert?" demanded Scamperoo, holding the necklace up to the light and feasting his eyes greedily on its gleaming emeralds. "That I cannot say." Toby Four cast a longing glance at the door, heartily wishing himself on the other side. "Then perhaps you will tell us why you did not turn this necklace over to the king?" suggested Pinny Penny mournfully. "Yes, how dared you keep it?" panted Scamperoo indignantly. "And what are you gaping at, 3x6? I'll wager you were in this too." "He was," shouted Two Before hoarsely. "He tried to steal the jewels from me. That's how he got the black eye." "But you tried to steal them from me, and what about that, my fine fellow?" Two Before turned a painful and uncomfortable scarlet under the king's accusing eye. "In Scampavia we have so little, your majesty," he stuttered miserably. "With these emeralds I thought I might buy a bit of land in some cooler and more comfortable country where my wife and two boys could be happy. A country where flowers would grow in a garden, and where a man would not have to spend his whole life wrestling with rocks and weeds and drilling for hours in the hot sun for no reason whatsoever." "Ha!" exclaimed Pinny Penny, looking meaningly at the king. "Ha! Yourself!" grunted Scamperoo wrathfully. Then, as the emeralds continued to sparkle and glitter in his hand, his anger subsided. "You did very wrong to keep the necklace Two Before," he stated mildly, "but I have decided to forgive you. Return now to the second county and explain to the merchant who gave you this necklace that I must have all three." "All three!" exclaimed Two Before. "But he's entitled by law to two of them." "My word is the law here, and you can choose between a broken law or a broken head," Scamperoo told him calmly. "He is the king," murmured Pinny Penny in a quiet voice. There was nothing sarcastic in the manner of his speech, but something in the Prime Minister's expression made the king prickle all over with discomfort. "Yes, I am the king," he shouted explosively, "and moreover I have spoken. Begone, both of you, and you, Two Before, have 2 days to return with those 2 necklaces. The necklaces, or your head, do you understand? And, you may tell that merchant in your county that he need send no more of his wares to the capital. The 3 necklaces will suffice," he bellowed as the 2 supervisors went bolting through the door. "How nice, they will suffice." "You are the king," sniffed Pinny Penny with a sour smile. Are you a parrot or a prime minister? Stop repeating that silly stuff and tell me about Oz, commanded Scamperoo, clasping the emerald necklace around his fat throat. Have you ever heard of this place, Pinny Penny? It must be a rich and marvelous country if peddlers can trade emerald necklaces as carelessly as we trade wooden beads. It is a marvelous country, answered Pinny Penny thoughtfully. I remember my father telling me about the capital of Oz, an emerald city where even the streets were inlaid with jewels and every tower and wall was studded with emeralds. Well, why have I never been told about this? Wheezed the king peevishly. A country like that, just a precious stone's throw away, so to speak. Your Majesty has never cared for reading or study, Penny. Penny reminded him a bit maliciously. In our library there is a whole history of Oz. Fetch it, bring it to me at once, panted the king, bouncing up and down on his throne like a big bad baby, which in truth he was. I must discover why Oz is so rich and prosperous while we are so poor and unfortunate. Not so unfortunate and poor as we are unwise and greedy, stated Pinny Penny, stalking calmly across the room. If your Majesty would study ways to improve Scampavia and allow your own subjects to keep a fair share of their crops and merchandise, we might be a powerful country too. Nonsense! What can we do with a rocky little desert like this? Blustered Scamperoo contemptuously. Scampavia is a dull little kingdom, a dumb little kingdom, a king-dumb, that's a good name for it. And you? Murmured Penny under his breath as he hastened away to fetch the book on Oz. Returning, he plumped the fat volume down on the king's knees and stood back with folded arms. Well, do you expect me to read all this? Wailed Scamperoo in dismay. Why, it would take a year or more. Explain it to me, Pinny Penny. Just give me the gist of the matter. Just give me the gist. There, I've made a joke. Ha, 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 ha. I've made a joke. But Oz is no joke, said the Prime Minister shortly. Your Majesty had better get that through your head at once. Now attend closely, and I will endeavor to give you the most important facts about this rich and enchanting country across the desert. In the first place, Pinny Penny looked severely over his specs. Oz is about 50 times as large as Scampavia, a great oblong undulating country divided into 4 triangular kingdoms. Each of these kingdoms has its own ruler, but all 4 are subject to the rule of Ozma of Oz, whose capital, the Emerald City, is in the exact center of Oz. A girl, exclaimed Scamperoo, leaning forward excitedly. How can a mere girl rule over an important country like that? By using her heart as well as her head, by encouraging thrift and rewarding industry, announced Pinny Penny in a tone that made the king wince. Your Majesty would do well to read of her wise laws and plans for the betterment of her country. You may just skip all that, sniffed Scamperoo, closing his mouth stubbornly. Tell me who are the rulers of these 4 kingdoms, and the general customs and characteristics of the people. Closing his eyes and putting his fingertips together, Pinny Penny began solemnly. The northernmost country of Oz is the land of the Gillikins, famed for its luscious grapes, plums, wisteria, and heather. It is a purple country and is ruled over by Joe King and Queen Hyacinth, who live in an amethyst-trimmed castle high in the Gillikin Mountains. The Eastern Empire of Oz is a yellow country, known for its wheat, corn, butter, pumpkins, daffodils, and gold mines. Nick Chopper is emperor of the Winkies, and this singular ruler is entirely made of tin plate and celebrated in song and story as the Tin Woodman of Oz. Pinny Penny paused a moment to catch his breath and then continued quietly. The Southland is red and noted for its strawberries, tomatoes, beets, red birds, red wood, and red heads. Glinda, the good sorceress, governs the quadlings who make up its inhabitants, and she knows as much magic as Ozma herself. Oh, it's one of those magic places where one just snaps the fingers to get what he wants, sighed the king discontentedly. Well, go on. "The western country of Oz is blue," continued Pinny Penny obligingly, "and everyone has heard of its famous Blue Ridge Mountains, its blue birds, its violets, its blue skies, and its capital, the Sapphire City. Cheeriobed is king, and Orin is queen of the Munchkins, and they live in the Sapphire City in almost as much magnificence as Ozma in the Emerald City. Is that all you wish to know?" "About the army," muttered Scamperoo, wrinkling up his forehead. "Has this girl ruler a great army stationed at her capital?" Penny grinned in spite of himself. "The young fairy ruler of Oz is opposed to all wars and fighting, and has at her court an army consisting of one tall soldier with green whiskers," he explained hurriedly. "One soldier with green whiskers," shouted the king, nearly tumbling off his throne. "I never heard anything more ridiculous in my life. I thought you said Oz wasn't a joke, and yet you stand there and tell me about an army of one soldier. Why, that's the funniest thing I ever heard. Ha ha ha!" "Laugh if you wish," said Penny resignedly, "but don't forget that Ozma has more magic appliances at her fingertips than we have pebbles on our desert. In her palace lives the famous Wizard of Oz, who can work every sort of transformation and enchantment, but does so only for the good of the country." "Humph!" exclaimed the king. "Well, how many fighting men have we?" 700 Scampavian soldiers in each of the 7 counties," answered Pinny Penny reluctantly. "But let me warn your majesty that the idea you have in your head is sheer madness and will lead to nothing but ruin. Take off your crown, put on your nightcap, and dream away this foolishness." "And a fine-looking crown it is," snapped the king, snatching off his crown and looking at it angrily. "But these emeralds will brighten it up a bit, eh, Pinny Penny? It is not the sparkle of gems in a king's crown that count. It is the jewels of wisdom in the head under the crown that make him happy and well-beloved." "Stop! Enough!" yelled the king, hurling the crown with all his might at Pinny Penny. "When will you stop this infernal lecturing and scolding?" "When your majesty stops talking nonsense," sighed Pinny, catching the crown with one hand and pulling a long bell cord with the other. "Come now, let us have our tea and forget about Oz," he proposed calmly. "Lemon or cream, your highness?" "Lemon," growled the king sourly, and slapping open the book of history on his knees, he stared long and enviously at a picture of the Emerald City of Oz. Chapter 2. The King and the Merchant. 2 days had passed since Scamperoo had come into possession of the emerald necklace. He had never taken it off for a moment. He even wore it to bed, and spent most of the daytime admiring himself and it in the palace mirrors. Now, as the afternoon of the second day drew to a close, he kept bouncing over to the windows that commanded a view of the highway. "If that rascal does not turn up soon, I'll explode, probably," predicted Pinny Penny, who was playing solitaire with the only pack of cards the castle afforded. "Calm yourself, Scamper. What good are these emeralds when you come right down to it?" "Good? Good. They are worth more than this whole miserable castle," answered the king indignantly. "I can sell them and buy—" No, I'll never part with them," he corrected himself hastily. "They give me a feeling of importance and power. Our star has risen, Pinny Penny. Great days are ahead. Hark, listen, is that a footstep in the courtyard?" Darting back to the window, the portly monarch flattened his nose against the pane. It's Tooby 4, he shouted, hopping up and down like a schoolboy. "And there's a tall, bearded stranger with him. If your majesty will quietly seat yourself, I'll endeavor to announce them," reproved Pinny Penny, gathering up his cards. "Remember, you are a king and not a jumping jack." "Oh, all right." Scamperoo flung himself heavily down among his cushions, and presently the tramp of feet along the corridor proclaimed the arrival of the long-awaited supervisor. Penny advanced stiffly to meet him, and after a whispered conversation he called out in a bored voice, "To before governor of our second province, and Micaiah the merchant, your majesty." "Yes, yes, but where are the emeralds?" panted Scamperoo, leaning forward eagerly as the two travelers advanced respectfully to the throne. Drawing a small bag from his leather jerkin, Tobyfour held it sullenly out to the king. "Here, your majesty, and here also is the merchant who goes with the necklace." 2x4 haughtily indicated the turbaned Scampavian beside him. "Yes, yes, the merchant. The king, intent upon the jewels, did not even look up. He goes with the necklaces, you say? Well, ha, ha! Now he may go without them. That is all I require of you, my good fellow. Your presence here is not necessary or desirable. You may go. Do you understand?" "Go?" Micaiah drew himself up to his fullest height, which was pretty high, I can tell you. "Perhaps your majesty will suggest where. For these 3 necklaces I traded my house, my shops, and all my other possessions. You say that is all, and it is indeed. Since you have taken all I own and possess, your majesty must take me also. You owe me a living, and I am here to say so." "Say no more," put in Penny soothingly. "Micaiah is right, Scamperoo, and well within his rights as well. We must make a place for him in the palace." "What can you do?" he inquired practically. "Do?" The merchant opened his eyes very wide. "Do? I am a merchant accustomed to dealing in jewels, china, cloth, and basketware." "Then you'll be the very one to help out in the kitchen and laundry," proposed Penny brightly. "There are no jewels, but we have onions and potatoes aplenty, and with the dirty dishes and hampers of soiled linens, you will be right at home." "What?" screamed Micaiah, as 2x4 snickered behind his hand. "You require this mean idle toil of me?" "Micaiah, son of Matora, son of Matanik, merchants for these thousands of years. This is preposterous, an outrage. I will go. I will go indeed. I will start a war, an uprising, a revolution. Help, help, help," yelled the merchant shrilly. "The king has stolen my emeralds." "Stop! Stop! Not so loud!" begged Scamperoo, leaping agilely off his throne and pattering anxiously after Micaiah. "You may leave us, Penny. I think I can find something better than kitchen work for this honest citizen." "Humph!" snorted Penny, and motioning for 2x4 to follow him, he marched disapprovingly from the royal presence. "You mustn't mind, old Penny," puffed the king, dropping a bit breathlessly on his throne. There, now, sit down and make yourself comfortable. As I was saying, Penny has very odd notions at times." "Very odd," agreed Micaiah, and seating himself on a chair opposite the king, he fastened his eyes greedily on the sparkling chains now clasped firmly about the monarch's fat throat. "Now then, we must find something easy and pleasant for you," went on the king, scratching one ear reflectively. You might spend your time entertaining me. I'll wager you are just full of good stories, songs, and amusing tricks." "Tricks?" exclaimed the merchant, elevating his nose disdainfully. Then a sudden gleam came into his small black eyes. "Tricks?" he repeated more pleasantly. "Ah, your majesty is right. How well you have guessed my secret." Leaning forward, he held his hand up to his mouth and, looking furtively over his shoulder, whispered hoarsely, "I am a magician, king, and well versed in the arts of sorcery." "Sorcery!" cried Scamperoo, clasping himself delightedly about his middle. "How perfectly panoramic. Magic is the very thing we need around here. Tell me quickly, what can you do?" "How much magic do you know? Is there some place where we can be quite alone?" Micaiah held up his hand mysteriously. "No one must know I am a magician. It must be a secret between us." "Of course." "Of course. agreed the king, rolling off his throne with more speed than dignity. "Come to my private walled garden. No one can hear us there." "No one?" asked Matthias sharply. "Are there then no guards upon the wall?" "No guards, no servants, no one at all is allowed in my garden," the king assured him proudly. "And is there a door in the garden's wall?" Matthias, stroking his long beard, stood regarding the king thoughtfully. "My first trick requires a door." "Of course there's a door, or how should I get out and in myself? Come along, come along." Waddling into the corridor, Scamperoo started off at a quick trot for his private garden. Matthias, grinning wickedly to himself, stepped softly after the king. Once in the garden, he meant to have his necklaces, even if he had to take off the king's head to get them. "One sweep of my scimitar," murmured the merchant to himself. "Ho, ho, this is too easy." The king's garden, when they reached it, was no more than a small sandy square with some cactus plants in the center and a rickety bench against the wall. Seating himself heavily on the bench, Scamperoo made room for the merchant beside him. "Now then," he grunted hurriedly, "begin. Show me what you can do. Prove that you are a magician." "First, I must have the necklaces," stated Matthias calmly. "Without the emeralds, I cannot do a single trick." But if the magic is in the emeralds, I can be my own magician," answered Scamperoo, clutching the chains with both hands. "But your majesty is not a magician," Matthias told him reasonably. "You do not know the proper words or incantations. No, I myself must wear these magic jewels. And what harm is there in that? As soon as your wish is granted, I will hand them straight back to you." "What's that? Can you really grant wishes?" Scamperoo's eyes began to snap and dance with greed and interest. "Certainly," promised Matthias, blinking shrewdly across the square and estimating with his eye the distance he should have to run to reach the door in the garden wall. "All you have to do is to think of something you want. Close your eyes, count slowly to 100, and I, wearing the 3 necklaces, will easily grant your wish." "I thought you trusted me and that we were going to be friends," he finished reproachfully. "We were, that is, take them." Unclasping the heavy chains, Scamperoo, who already had a wish in mind, thrust them into the merchant's hands. Closing his eyes, he made his wish and then began to count hysterically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At 6, Matthias was halfway across the garden when horrors! A great white horse with a golden tail and mane dropped like a plummet from the sky. Pawing up the sand in Matthias' path, he flashed his yellow eyes so wickedly the merchant fell back into the cactus bushes, where he lay screaming with shock, pain, and amazement. But Scamperoo, thinking all the noises he heard were but magic incantations, went calmly on with his counting. He had reached 60 before Matthias had recovered himself enough to crawl out of the cactus and make his way cautiously back to the bench. The immense white horse continued to stare at him threateningly, but as it made no attempt to spring forward, he began to regain a little of his usual assurance and courage. Great Guru! Then there was magic in the emeralds. This horse was undoubtedly the king's wish come true, a beastly wish. Shuddered the merchant as he stared in fascination at the pawing monster and wondered what to do next. He was afraid to run past the white horse and escape with the jewels, but ha! He could make a wish for himself, a wish that would carry him and the emeralds far from Scampavia, the farther the better. Closing his eyes, he muttered a hurried sentence and waited tensely to be transported to Ev, a country he had once visited in his youth. But nothing at all happened, and gritting his teeth with vexation, Matthias opened his eyes just as Scamperoo finished counting 100. "So," beamed the delighted monarch, embracing him heartily. "You have done it. You really are a magician. Behold my horse, a horse in 1,000. A golden-maned charger fit for a king, for a conqueror. Of all the dumb things, fumed Mattia, wriggling fiercely away from Scamperoo. "Of all the dumb things to wish for, a horse is about the dumbest of all." "Dumb?" whinnied the white steed with an indignant snort. "I'm not a dumb beast. I can laugh, I can talk. That's because I'm from Oz and my full name is Chalk."
Cha!
"Loke," quavered Scamperoo, who had never heard an animal speak a word in his life. He says his name's Chalk." The king looked appealingly at the merchant, and seeing he would have to live up to the role of magician, Mattia assumed an air of careless superiority. "Well, he doubtless knows his own name, your majesty. If he says his name is Chalk, it probably is Chalk, and the reason he can talk is because he comes from Oz, land of the magic necklaces, where all animals speak as well as we do." "Better," sniffed Chalk. Then, taking an experimental nibble at the cactus, he gave a terrific squeal of pain and displeasure, flung up his heels, and began to race around the garden at such a furious pace, Mattia and the king jumped behind the bench and cowered miserably against the wall. "Well, there you are," panted the merchant angrily. "You have your horse, and what now? He's yours, you know, and you'll have to control him." Mattia ducked behind the king as Chalk thundered past, covering them both with dust and sand. "If you ask me, you simply wasted a wish. Why, you might have wished yourself a ton of emeralds, or a kingdom 10 times as large and prosperous as Scampavia, but there's plenty of time for that," sputtered Scamperoo, holding desperately to the bench. "Since you are a magician, you can grant all of my wishes." "Oh, no, no, indeed!" Mattia spoke hastily, remembering the way the emeralds had failed to grant his wish. "I can grant only 1 wish a week," he explained breathlessly, "and I trust next time you will think before you wish. Whoa, there, you Ozian brute, you silly monster, stop that! Whoa, ho! Whoa, I tell you. Are you my master?" Leaping lightly over the cactus, Chalk came to a sudden halt before the bench. "No, this king is your master," answered Mattia thankfully enough. "Speak to him, Scamper," he urged in a lower voice as Chalk reared curiously up on his hind legs to have a good look at the king. Behave yourself," commanded Scamperoo tearfully. "How do you expect me to ride on your back if you act like this?" "Ah, so you expect to ride me?" Chalk came down with a thud and grinned broadly at his new master. "If you have never seen a horse grin, you have no idea how upsetting it can be." "Well, I suppose I shall have to put up with you," he neighed finally. "Just call a groom or a servant, old Rubbertub, and see that I'm served my evening oats, 3 apples, and a measure of corn." "Certainly, certainly," agreed the king, starting off on trembling legs. "Well, I must say this is splendid." "Splendid," protested Mattia, hurrying nervously after the king. He was afraid to stay in the garden with Chalk. "Where do you expect to get taking orders from a horse? I suppose you'd prefer me to take them from you," puffed Scamperoo, beginning to grow a little angry himself. "Here, give me my necklaces." Snatching the emeralds from the merchant's neck, he went charging into the palace, hardly knowing whether to be glad or sorry for the sudden change in his fortunes. But by the time he reached his throne room, he had calmed down considerably. Seating himself hurriedly on his throne, he pondered how he could keep all these strange occurrences from Pinny Penny. He felt sure Pinny Penny would never approve of magic necklaces or a talking horse. Well, now, he'd just tell his meddlesome prime minister that the stamping, snorting steed in the garden belonged to Mattia and must be fed and stabled. When he made another wish, and he had a whole week to think about that, when he made another wish he would be careful to wish for everything he needed. As for this whiskery wizard, he would flatter him along until he discovered the right magic to use with the emeralds. Then he would wish him away like that. Like that! Snapping his fingers spitefully, Scamperoo pulled the long bell cord that summoned Pinny Penny. His royal charger should be fed. Not many monarchs had a talking horse with a golden mane. Oh, but he was coming on. He'd show Pinny Penny yet what a smart ruler he was. Now Mattia, following the king slowly into the palace, had done some reflecting too. He resolved not to lose his temper again with this provoking simpleton of a sovereign. He would simply humor him along, and before the week was out he would have another chance to steal the necklaces and escape to some far country. There, at his leisure, he would experiment until he discovered the right way to use them. He could not understand why the king had got his wish and his own wish had gone for nothing. What was the secret of the magic emeralds? With his forehead still wrinkled in thought, Mattia entered the throne room and quietly seated himself in a chair opposite Scamperoo. Much to his relief, the king neither reproached nor upbraided him. "Ah, so there you are," he cried in his best meant-to-be cheerful voice. "I have just sent Pinny Penny to feed your horse." "My horse," barked Mattia, starting up in dismay, then catching a meaning wink from the king, he quickly winked back. "It seemed wisest," murmured Scamperoo, "to say nothing of your magic powers for the present. All this will be our secret," he finished playfully. "Oh, yes, yes, indubitably." While Scamperoo was still wondering what indubitably meant, Mattia hurried out of the room and took a long drink of water from the old-fashioned fountain in the hall.
"Oh, secret," he repeated bitterly to himself. "Our secret indeed."
Chapter 3. More about the emeralds. Scamperoo had not slept a wink. He tossed from side to side of the royal bed, his head simply buzzing with enchanting plans for the future. With the magic emeralds he could have everything he desired, and his desires and wishes were multiplying so rapidly he scarcely knew where to begin or what to wish first. The necklaces pressed uncomfortably against his throat, but he would not take them off. He was so weary he ached in every bone, but still he could not stop thinking, and just as the castle clock tolled 7, the very thing he should wish for first came suddenly to him. Ah, that was it. Too bad he had to wait a whole week, but a week would pass, and perhaps during that time he would discover for himself the magic secret of his sparkling new treasures. Then he could be his own magician and put that meddlesome merchant in his place. As he was running over in his mind possible places to send Mattia, the door of his room opened cautiously and Pinny Penny stuck in his head.
Well, and did I ring?"
grunted Scamperoo fretfully. "This is a fine time to awaken an emperor." "Emperor?" exclaimed Pinny Penny, coming all the way into the room and closing the door. "Since when has Scampavia's king become an emperor? Oh, go away and don't bother me." Turning his back on Pinny Penny, the king thumped his pillow and closed his eyes as tightly as he could. "It's all about the horse," whispered Pinny Penny, coming around to the other side of the bed. "A strange and magnificent animal for a mere merchant, if I may be permitted to say so. Not only that, it talks. It's ordering the stable boys around in a shocking manner, and it even told me to mind my own business." "Well, why don't you?" suggested Scamperoo, rolling over on his back. "Of course he talks, Pinny. He's an Oz horse, and all animals from Oz talk. I thought you knew that." "Well, if this merchant has a talking horse, he is not so poor as he pretends," persisted Pinny Penny, shaking his finger under the king's nose. "My advice is to set the fellow on his horse and send him about his business as quickly as possible. I don't like his looks, Scamper. He's mean and mischievous, and mark my words, no good will come of him or his necklaces." "I don't like his looks any better than you," agreed the king, clasping his fat hands on his stomach. "But if I keep the emeralds, I must keep the merchant, and besides, I've a notion I could ride that talking horse myself." "Oh, good goats and gravy. Then I'd best go and lay in a supply of splints and liniment." Pushing his specs up on his forehead, Pinny Penny cast a disgusted glance at his huge reclining master and rushed hurriedly from the royal presence. "Now, Mattia, as you can well imagine, had slept no better than the king. In the small room to which Penny had taken him, he paced restlessly up and down. After all, he knew only two facts about the magic emeralds. The first, that they really could, under certain conditions, grant wishes. The second, that they must not be worn by the person making the wish. This much the merchant had reasoned out for himself. As the king had got his wish while he, Mattia, was wearing the necklaces, and he himself had not got the wish he made with the emeralds around his own throat, that much seemed certain. Snapping his fingers joyfully and feeling sure the king was now wearing the jeweled chains, Mattia made a second wish, counting slowly to 100. But the hearty supper he had ordered as a test failed to appear, and flinging himself down on the bed, he began to rack his brains for some other solution of the mystery. Perhaps the magic power rested in a single stone which he had luckily touched as the king made his wish. Holding his head with both hands, he tried to remember exactly what he had done as Scamperoo began to count, but it was no use. He could not recall a single thing after he had started to run across the garden. And how, concluded the infuriated fellow, was he ever to discover the way to use the emeralds without arousing the king's suspicions or revealing the fact that he knew no more about them than Scamperoo himself? Muttering with vexation, he kicked a footstool all the way across the room and sat staring morosely at the worn carpet. The short, uneasy nap he finally got before morning did him no good, and cross and jumpy as a cougar, he made his way to the dingy dining hall of the palace. The king had already breakfasted, and looking out of the window, Mattia saw a terrified servant leading the talking horse around the courtyard, Scamperoo following at a safe distance. The sight of the stamping white charger made Mattia shudder anew. What a waste, he reflected bitterly, and if the king grew fond of the saucy monster, it would make his own task even more difficult, for until he succeeded in stealing the necklaces, Mattia did not intend to let Scamperoo out of his sight. Gulping down the weak coffee and cold eggs, a shabby servant grudgingly placed before him, he hastened outside. "Good morning, your majesty," he called out heartily, "and may I have a word with your royal highness?" "What kind of a word?" snickered Chalk, rolling his yellow eyes roguishly round at the merchant. "Give him a word, old Rabatub, if that's all he wants. The right word for him, I should say, would be go or no, and then we all could be happy." "It is about the necklaces," confided Mattia, ignoring the horse utterly and falling easily into step with the king. "They must be cleaned every day to keep them in good wishing condition." "But I was just going for a ride," objected Scamperoo with a little frown. "Won't this afternoon do?" "No, now is the proper time," answered Mattia impressively, thinking how clever he was to have invented this ruse to get hold of the emeralds. "If your majesty will just give them to me, I'll polish them up while you are, er, exercising." "No, no, that is, I'd better come and help you," Scamperoo spoke quickly. "I can ride this afternoon." "You think so?" With an exuberant prance, Chalk rose on his hind legs and spun around like a pinwheel. "Well, see you later, old sauce." And with the terrified stable boy hanging to his bridle, he went galloping off to the stable. "If you take my advice, you'll have that creature knocked on the head," said Mattia savagely. "Surely you won't endanger our lives by riding on his back?" "Oh, our lives!" exclaimed Scamperoo, looking at Mattia in surprise. "You do not have to ride him. In fact, he's really my horse," he stated jealously. "So long as your majesty wears the magic necklaces, I must go wherever you go and do whatever you do," explained the merchant loftily. How very awkward." In spite of himself, Scamperoo groaned as he thought how tiresome it would be with Mattia trailing after him from morning till night. "I should think a magician like yourself could arrange things more sensibly." "But consider what is at stake," Mattia reminded him earnestly. "Together we can have and do anything we wish." "Is that not worth a little inconvenience?" Yes, I suppose so. But if we are to do everything together, I think I should know the magic wishing formula as well as you." Scamperoo looked defiantly up at his newest advisor. "That is impossible." Striding along stiffly, Matthias shook his head. "The incantation, once revealed, becomes powerless. Only one versed in magic is permitted to use the emeralds." "Have you thought at all about your next wish?" he asked, anxious to direct the king's mind into more cheerful channels. "We should plan and consult about it together, you know. But wait until we are in your majesty's throne room," he added quickly, as Scamperoo began to open and shut his mouth like a fish without saying anything. "While I am cleaning the necklaces, we can talk it over, yes?" Matthias' fingers fairly itched for the sparkling jewels, but restraining a mad impulse to snatch them from the king's throat, he walked along quietly beside Scamperoo, talking so calmly and convincingly that he soon had the Scampavian monarch not only willing but anxious to reveal the wish that had kept him awake most of the night. So they would not be disturbed. The king seated himself at a small table. Matthias drew up a chair opposite and held out his hand for the necklaces. Reluctantly, Scamperoo handed them over, keeping a jealous eye on the jewels as the merchant began polishing them with a small square of silk he had taken from his pocket. As he rubbed the silk over the emeralds, Matthias carefully examined each one for some mark or sign that would give him a clue to their magic power. Intent as he was upon this task, a few low-spoken words of Scamperoo made him sit suddenly erect and regard the king with new respect and attention. How in thunderation, thought Matthias wonderingly, had this fat, silly monarch ever managed to hit upon such a magnificent and breathtaking wish? And as Scamperoo explained and elaborated upon his plans and schemes for the future, the merchant's interest grew apace. Quicker and cleverer than the king, he saw not only the possibilities of this splendid wish, but all the difficulties and problems that must be met and disposed of before it could be reasonably granted. Leaning forward, the emeralds for the moment forgotten, he put his mouth close to Scamperoo's ear. "There are 3 things that must be done before your wish can be realized." Matthias spoke tensely. "First, second, third." After each short, whispered direction, Scamperoo nodded to show that he understood. "Then it would take 4 wishes to do it," he sighed, resting his elbows heavily on the table. "That will be 4 weeks, won't it?" "No, perhaps if we are careful we can work it all into 1, answered Matthias thoughtfully, and taking up his bit of silk he began polishing the emeralds with renewed vigor. The king, watching him, forgot his former dislike and distrust. Matthias' enthusiastic approval of his plans made him feel that perhaps he had misjudged this long-faced, whiskered stranger. Perhaps he would not wish him away, after all. He might prove very useful in the strange and magnificent future that stretched ahead. Matthias, on his part, had no such kindly intentions toward the king. He merely meant to make Scamperoo's wish his own, and so grand and daring was the prospect that he grew more impatient than ever to discover the way to accomplish it. Holding all 3 necklaces up to the light, he squinted at them anxiously. The chains seemed identical in every respect, but no, what was this? One had a diamond clasp, while the clasps on the other 2 were of flattened emeralds. This, then, was the solution. The magic wishing power undoubtedly rested in the diamond clasp. Revealing in no way his satisfaction and elation over this important discovery, Matthias handed the necklaces back to the king. Somehow, decided the merchant, he must make Scamperoo touch the diamond clasp while he silently repeated the king's wish, but before that he needed a little time to prepare himself for the grand and glorious years that were to be his. As Scamperoo, exhausted by so much thinking early in the morning, waddled wearily over to his throne, Matthias strode to the bookshelves located in an adjoining alcove. "While your majesty rests, I will have a look at this interesting library," he murmured ingratiatingly, "and at the same time store up some useful information for the future." Scamperoo sleepily returned the merchant's broad wink, then, sinking back among his cushions, closed his eyes. From his chair in the alcove, Mattia could keep the king in view, and satisfied that Scamperoo was really asleep, he began hurriedly turning over the pages of the large volume Penny had, but that morning returned to the shelves. Soon he became so absorbed he forgot all about the king. And that was a pity, for had he taken the trouble to look, he would have discovered that the king was no longer there. Chapter 4. The King and His Talking Horse. Now it is true that the king had closed his eyes as Mattia settled himself in the alcove to read, but he was very far from asleep. In fact, no more than 5 minutes had been ticked away by the old-fashioned clock in the corner before Scamperoo straightened up as if suddenly struck by lightning. Casting a cautious look at the quiet merchant, he began to slide rapidly toward the door. Opening it without a sound, he slipped out into the corridor and, closing it just as softly, went puffing away to the quarters of the white wishing horse at the back of the courtyard. Though usually unenterprising and dull, we must credit Scamperoo with one brilliant idea. As Chalk had been brought to Scampavia by the magic emeralds, why should he not know the trick of using them? Fairly panting with eagerness and impatience, Scamperoo jerked open the door of the stable and stepped recklessly into Chalk's stall. "Ah, the little kingerling," whinnied Chalk, tossing his mane gaily. For some reason or other he found his fat master tremendously amusing, and while he had an immediate desire to trample on Mattia and frighten off the stable boys, he felt only an affectionate tolerance for the tubby little ruler of Scampavia. "Have you come for your ride?" he inquired, giving the king a playful poke with his soft nose. "No, I've come to talk to you," wheezed Scamperoo, seating himself carefully on an overturned water bucket. "Quick, tell me all you know about these magic emeralds." Touching his 3 necklaces with a trembling forefinger, the king looked imploringly into the face of his new and powerful steed. "Humph!" Chalk shifted a mouthful of hay to his other cheek. "Well, as to that, or rather them, all that I know is nothing. You forget that I only came into existence yesterday afternoon." Of course, of course." "I was the one who wished you here," explained the king impatiently. "You wished me here?" mused Chalk, staring meditatively at the comical figure on the water bucket. "Well, I hardly know whether to thank you or to jump on you with all 4 feet. Even without any experience at all, I can see that this is no place for me." "You're right," sighed Scamperoo, clasping his knees dejectedly. "It's no place for me either. That is why I must know about the emeralds. They can satisfy our every wish, and if we just knew how to use them, we could go away together." "You think you could manage that?" sniffed Chalk, who had his own opinion as to what would happen once the king mounted on his back. "Yes, together," insisted Scamperoo. "Try to think," he begged earnestly. "You say you know nothing, then how did you know you came from Oz and your name and all that?" "That's right, how did I?" Putting one ear forward and one ear backward, Chalk swallowed his hay with a quick gulp. "There must be a lot of stuff in my head that I practically know nothing about," he reasoned thoughtfully. "Suppose you tell me exactly what happened, and then I'll tell you what I think of it." So, hunching forward, Scamperoo recounted the whole story of the merchant and the necklaces, how he and Mattia had retired to his private garden, how there, with the merchant wearing the emeralds, his first wish had been granted. "And a splendid wish it was, too," sighed Scamperoo, looking fondly up at his white horse. "Never forget that you were my first wish, fellow." "I'm hardly likely to forget myself," snickered Chalk loftily. "But attend closely, old Crown and Scepter. When I dropped down into that garden, yon whiskered merchant was running for the gate as if his life depended on it. He only stopped because he was afraid to pass me, and from the way he fell into those cactus bushes, I'll wager he was as astonished as you were that the emeralds had granted your wish." Chalk wrinkled his forehead shrewdly. "I don't believe he knows any more about the necklaces than we do." If he did, he would never have sent you one in the first place, and he would have granted all of his own wishes and been in some splendid other place. Matthias a fraud," finished the king's horse vehemently, "and means to steal back the emeralds." Of course, of course. Oh, oh, why didn't I think of that myself? What shall we do now?" wailed Scamperoo, jumping up so quickly he overturned the bucket, for Chalk's frankly spoken opinion confirmed his own suspicions of the merchant. "Sit down," advised the white horse, not unkindly. "I may not be a magician, but I have a little sense, and horse sense is what your majesty needs more than anything else." As Scamperoo righted the bucket and meekly sat down again, Chalk closed his eyes, standing silent and motionless for so long the king thought he had fallen into a trance. But just as he began to fidget nervously about on the uncomfortable edge of the bucket, the white horse opened his eyes and, flashing a triumphant smile at Scamperoo, began calling in a loud, lordly voice. "Boy, boy, boy!" While the king regarded him with mingled misgivings and admiration, Chalk snapped out directions to the clumsy little groom who came running in answer to his summons. When his mane and tail had been thoroughly brushed and he was decked out once more in the splendid saddle and trappings he had worn on his first appearance in Scampavia, he dismissed the groom with a haughty toss of his head. "Come," he breathed mysteriously. "Climb up, Scamperoo, and we'll scamperoodle before that rascally merchant even misses us. Have you decided upon the place we are to go?" he questioned curiously as the king made 7 frantic attempts to put his foot in the golden stirrup. "Heh, heh, heh, the other foot, master. How do you ever expect to mount that way?" "Stand on the bucket, Kingaling, catch hold of the saddle and pull. It's easy as oats once you get the hang of it." "Is it?" Lying mournfully on his back where he had fallen after his last effort, Scamperoo gazed mournfully upward, and Chalk himself began to champ, snort, and switch his tail with irritation. "You wished me on yourself, and now it looks as if you would have to wish yourself on me," he muttered savagely. "Here, give me those necklaces, hang them over my ear, and let's have done with this shameful exhibition." "You mean, if I wish myself upon your back, I will really be there?" panted Scamperoo, bouncing up like a rubber ball. "You mean you have discovered the secret of the emeralds?" "Certainly." The white horse regarded him scornfully through half-closed eyes, and the king, all too willing to be convinced, unclasped his 3 necklaces and, standing on tiptoe, hung them over Chalk's right ear. I wish to be upon this creature's back," puffed Scamperoo, his cheeks swelling out with suspense and importance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and scarcely had he begun to count before he found himself firmly seated in the saddle. "Now, not another word," commanded Chalk sternly. "Before you dare to speak, take those emeralds off my ear." With shaking hands the king did as he was told, his heart pounding so violently it almost kicked a hole in his shirt. "That's right," directed the white horse more mildly. "Now suppose you tell me where you intend to wish us, and what we do after that. Wishes are pretty quick, you know, and it is best to be prepared." But I cannot understand how you made them work," spluttered Scamperoo. "It's wonderful, it's marvelous. Do you understand what this means?" "Perfectly." Chalk rolled his eyes triumphantly round at his greedy little master. "My head seems to be full of magic, which is not strange, seeing that I was magically brought into existence, and the trick of the necklaces, once I got to thinking about them, is quite simple. Now I am what I am, a horse, and quite satisfied, but you with these emeralds may easily make a jackass of yourself, so you had better tell me what you wish before you wish it. For instance," he went on reprovingly, "if instead of wishing yourself upon my back, you had wished yourself a good horseman, how much wiser that would have been. There's a lot more to riding than getting into the saddle, you know. But never mind that now. What was this great big wish you and Mattia were planning together?" Leaning so far forward he almost lost his balance, Scamperoo hurriedly whispered into Chalk's left ear his grand and glorious wish for the future, being careful to add to his own wish the 3 crafty suggestions made by the clever merchant. "You are sure this is what you desire?" Chalk looked sharply and a little sadly at the rotund and royal figure on his back. "You mean to go away and leave your own people without a thought or care? Isn't there anyone here you would like to take along or give a share of your good fortune?" The king shook his head violently. "I might make a wish for Pinny Penny," he added rather sheepishly. "Good idea," sniffed Chalk. "What are you going to give old Skinny Pins? You know I rather like that old codger." Without delay and a bit spitefully, the king told him, and as this time Chalk found no fault with the wish, Scamperoo again placed the emeralds over Chalk's ear and quickly spoke 9 words. Then, without waiting to see whether Pinny Penny got his wish, Chalk again took command. "If you do exactly as I say, we'll get off before Mattia discovers you are gone and comes down here to slice off your head to get his necklaces," said the white horse severely. Lowering his voice to a whisper, he slowly enunciated 4 brief sentences. Tingling partly with fright and partly with anticipation, Scamperoo repeated the 4 sentences after Chalk and began his counting. But stars! Scarcely had he reached 10 before he felt a great lift and lurch, had just time to snatch back his emeralds and seize the reins before he and the huge white wishing horse, without leaving even a rustle in the quiet air, had gone, vanished, and completely disappeared from Scampavia. Chapter 5. A Great Celebration in Oz. "Why all the crown jewels, old Taz?" Resting his chin on the window ledge, Highboy looked inquiringly into the dressing room of Joe King, ruler of the Gillikins and all of the purple countries of Oz. The king's apartment was on the 10th floor of the royal palace. But this made no difference to Highboy, for Highboy was a giant horse whose telescope legs could be raised or lowered to any level, making him one of the most amazing and amusing animals in Oz. "I say, are we going anywhere in particular?" he drawled curiously as the king, decked out in his best braided traveling coat and amethyst crown, surveyed himself cheerfully in the long mirror. "W.E." chuckled the merry monarch, turning round with a hearty roar. "Ho, ho, H.O., and how do you know you are going? Well, I see you are wearing your best purple boots, and when the king of all the Gillikins wears his best purple boots, he usually rides his best purple horse, does he not?" "Right," admitted the king good-naturedly, "and I might as well tell you at once that we are going to the capital at the express invitation of Her Imperial Highness, Queen Ozma of Oz." The king cleared his throat importantly. "There is to be an immense festival to celebrate the discovery of Oz by mortals, the honors to be equally divided between the famous wizard who arrived here in a balloon from Omaha many years ago, and little Dorothy, who came by way of a Kansas cyclone somewhat later. Not only will the rulers of all 4 Oz kingdoms be present, but many other important and royal personages as well." "Well, well indeed," trumpeted the giant horse shrilly. "There you stand, all shined up like a doorknob and never a word to me. How'll I look? Why wasn't I told before? When do we start?" "Just as soon as Her Majesty decides what to wear and what to take with her," answered the king with a solemn wink. "Oh, then I'll have bushels of time." Highboy sighed heavily with relief. "So we're invited to the Emerald City, eh? How perfectly how simply magnif. Billy, Tommy, Jim." As he called the name of each little groom, Highboy let himself down a couple of stories, and by the time he reached a usual horse height and level on the ground, he had ordered himself a bath, a mane wave, an oil shampoo, and a hoofacure. Indeed, Highboy's plans for the party went on apace, and with the 3 grooms pattering after him with buckets, brushes, and sponges, he trotted anxiously up and down his great airy stable, picking out his most splendid saddle and bridle and silver-braided blanket for the journey. The giant horse wished to make an impression that would uphold, if not enhance, the honor and reputation of the Gillikins. He was eager to renew his friendship with Trot, a little mortal girl who lived in the palace, and with Herbie, the medicine man, and the many other interesting characters he had met on a former visit to the capital. In the Munchkin, Quadling, and Winky kingdoms, there was also a lively bustle and stir of preparation, and in many of the lesser kingdoms the kings, queens, and potentates made ready for the great spring festival in the Emerald City. And you can imagine the fun and excitement in the capital itself. Everyone had some special part in the program. Even the dogs and cats ran importantly about on countless errands like small messengers, their ears and tails quivering with interest and expectancy. After the visitors had been officially welcomed at the gates of the city, there was to be an imperial procession with bands, floats, and favors for everybody. Then there were to be games, races, and other exciting athletic events, and a grand banquet in the royal palace. A magic lantern ball in Ozma's garden would complete the festivities for the first day. For the second, pageants and tableaux depicting the important and historical events of Ozian history had been arranged for the morning. Not a bit more. A circus clown who had come to Oz from Philadelphia was putting on an outdoor circus in the afternoon, helped by Bob Up, the orphan who had come with him, and all the famous animals in the Emerald City. From squeals, shouts, and hilarious chuckles issuing from the huge white tent set just beyond the city wall, it promised to be an unqualified success. After the circus, Ozma had planned a picnic supper on the banks of the Winky River, to be followed by demonstrations in magic by the Wizard of Oz and Glinda, the good sorceress of the South, and last but not least, a lavish display of fireworks sent especially for the grand occasion by Happy Toko, Emperor of the Silver Isles. No wonder the children in the Emerald City could think of nothing but the coming celebration. No wonder Dorothy, Trot, and Betsy Bobbin, the little mortals who lived in the great palace and were princesses in their own right, were too busy to think of their titles or bother with their crowns. Dorothy, the first of the three to reach the capital, was Ozma's favorite companion, and Dorothy was perhaps the busiest of all. Not only had she planned all the tableaux and pageants, but had entire charge of decorating the palace and the Emerald City as well. The Scarecrow, whom Dorothy had discovered on her earliest trip to Oz, was her most willing and tireless assistant. This lively straw-stuffed gentleman had brains given him by the wizard, and was in high favor and constant demand because of his natural cheerfulness and amiable disposition. At the moment he and Dorothy were superintending the erection of a floral arch over the great jeweled gates of the city. This arch, grown and tended by the wizard, was so magically compounded that as each visitor rode through the gateway, a ribbon-tied bouquet of fragrant spring flowers dropped lightly into his or her lap. Dorothy and the Scarecrow had tried it out to their complete delight and satisfaction, and now, clasping their large bouquets, watched three energetic little gardeners tie up the last tendrils of the magic vine to the gaily painted arbor.
"You know,"
said Dorothy, peering over the flower tops at the Scarecrow,
"I can hardly wait till tomorrow."
"To think we'll be seeing Sir Hokus and Ojo and Unc Nunky and Eartha and Prince Tatters and all the others. And they'll be seeing us too, remember that," beamed the Scarecrow, closing one cotton eye. "And now, if you think you can manage for a few minutes without me, I had better go and study up on my speech of welcome." "Oh, are you making the speech of welcome? How grand, how thrilling!" Dorothy gazed admiringly up at her oldest friend in Oz. "Yes, and I'm also making the speech awarding medals to the discoverers of our country," confided the Scarecrow, thrusting out his chin and striking an attitude. "How will you feel when I pin that medal on your chest, my girl?"
"Well,"
sighed Dorothy, looking dreamily over her bouquet, "I couldn't feel any happier than I do now, but it certainly will be a great honor, Scarecrow." "A great honor? Well, I should snickerty-wicker. But what if I forget my speech right in the middle of a word? The Scarecrow pushed back his old blue hat and puckered up his forehead anxiously. How will I feel with all those kings and queens staring right at me? Really, I think Ozma had better have someone else make the speeches. Oh, go along with you, laughed Dorothy, giving him a little push. Haven't you magic brains? You'll be a splendid speechmaker. Do you think so? Well, I'll do my best. Somewhat reassured, the Scarecrow patted Dorothy on the shoulder and started off through the park. Dorothy could tell from the way he flung his arms about that he was rehearsing, and with an amused little smile she hurried back to the palace to put the finishing touches to the decorations for Ozma's throne room. Halfway there, she met the hungry tiger carrying a large basket in his teeth and followed by 10 little kitchen boys, also bearing enormous baskets. Good gracious, Tige, what's this? Dorothy stared at the little procession in surprise. The hungry tiger and cowardly lion have lived in the Emerald City almost as long as Dorothy, and though the tiger's appetite is tremendous and he is always threatening to eat a fat baby, he has never yet done it and is tame as Dorothy's pet kitten Eureka. Oh, hadn't you heard? The hungry tiger set down his basket and smoothed back his whiskers complacently. I'm the head of the reception committee for all visiting animals, and am on my way now to buy refreshments for the great banquet and picnic. And trust me, he gave Dorothy a broad wink, to do it right. Just let me see that list, Capo. Taking a long slip from the first kitchen boy, he began to drone off the names of the capital's famous four-footed citizens, and then the she could read the list over his shoulder. But they all live here. Who's coming from foreign parts, Tiger? Well, confided the tiger, you'll be glad to know our old friend the Comfortable Camel is making the trip with Hawkus. I mean the Yellow Knight, and Marigolden, the princess he married, is riding a warhorse named Stampedro. The king and queen of the Gillikins will make the trip on the giant horse. Quite a lot of horses, aren't there? And I hope Highboy keeps his legs in bounds. It makes me nervous to see a creature one height 1 minute and another height the next. You knew the Prince of Pumperdink was bringing Kabumpo, the elegant elephant? Don't you mean that Kabumpo is bringing him? Put in Dorothy mischievously. And won't you be glad to see him again? Yes, I'll be glad enough to see him, murmured the tiger, but feeding him is quite a big problem. Well, you're just the one to do it, said Dorothy, smoothing away the wrinkle between the tiger's pointed ears. You have such a big appetite yourself, you'd know just how hungry an elephant would feel. I see you've got Roger down, too. I'm pretty sure King Atto will bring his reed bird, so I'm ordering a dozen boxes of animal crackers for Roger and a barrel of apples for Snufferbucks. I wonder if he'll dance for us. Dorothy's eyes brightened, for she had taken a great fancy to the faithful bear with whom Ojo had traveled all over Oz.
He's bound to be jolly and full of fun.
And hungry as a bear, sighed the tiger with a worried frown. But that is easy compared to a dragon. King Cheeriobed is bringing a dragon, and this dragon's on a diet of mustard and sulphur. Think of that, my child, and say, I'd best get along or I'll never get my marketing done.
And I must go too,
said Dorothy, reminded of her many responsibilities. So, giving the tiger's ear an affectionate pull, she ran all the way back to the palace. In the throne room, she found Ozma and Tik-Tok in a quiet conference. I've made Tik-Tok master of ceremonies, said Ozma, looking up with a smile of welcome, because he never forgets what he's wound up to remember.
And I'll be sure to keep him wound up,
promised Dorothy, patting the machine man on his copper shoulder. Tik-Tok was another of Dorothy's discoveries, and had been manufactured by a magician to be a slave of the King of Ev. But here he was, thanks to Dorothy, enjoying a life of interest and ease in the capital. Tik-Tok could talk, think, and move about as well as anyone when he was wound, and was much more reliable and tireless than a real person. I am to announce the visitors as they enter the palace and person. I'll conduct them to their royal quarters, Chick-Chock told Dorothy in his slow and precise manner. Ozma can depend on me absolutely, and every wry thing will go like clockwork. With two stiff bows and ticking with importance, the metal man marched proudly from the room, like clockwork. Ha ha! Did you hear that? And why not with a clockwork man in charge? Oh, Ozma, doesn't it all look grand and gorgeous? Clasping the little queen around her slender waist, Dorothy gazed around the beautiful throne room. Every window and doorway was garlanded with flowers, while hundreds of palms, ferns, and fluttering silk pennants gave it an unwonted look of pomp and ceremony. "Let me see," mused Dorothy, straightening the folds of a white satin curtain. "I'm to stand on your right, Betsy Bobbin and Trot on your left, and the Patchwork Girl is to hold your train at the grand reception. Do you think you can trust her, Ozma? She'll probably try to jump rope or wave it like a handkerchief." "Oh, Scraps is pretty good, considering her giddy make-up," observed Ozma with a little smile, "and she would be so disappointed not to be with us." "I'm sure I can trust her, at least for a little while. Trust me, trust me, trust me." "You disgust me," shouted a merry voice, and Scraps, who had been peeking through the curtains at the back of the room, took a long-running slide, landing in an unladylike heap at the foot of the dais leading to the throne. Scraps, made from an old crazy quilt and stuffed with cotton, had been brought to life by a magician to serve his wife, but the Patchwork Girl had come to the Emerald City with Ojo and never returned to her creators, scorning the humble career of a maidservant. She was so gay and amusing, Ozma had allowed her to remain at the palace. "Must I go in training to hold a train?" she demanded, springing to her feet and striking so comical an attitude both Dorothy and Ozma had to laugh. "Of course not," said Ozma kindly. "Just be careful and do not do any gymnastics during the reception." "Oh, I'll be careful and so dignified. I'll probably split a seam, but wait till you see the grand aerial balance-defying stunt I'm to put on for the big show," puffed Scraps, snapping her button eyes boastfully. "I'm to walk the tightrope and not a circus, so long, girls, I must go and practice." "Well, even if she falls, it won't matter," remarked Dorothy with a slight shudder as the Patchwork Girl jumped recklessly out of the window and, picking herself up, set off for the circus grounds on the edge of the park. "Oh, Ozma, with all the interesting people here already and with all the grand and exciting ones who are coming, I believe we'll have the best time we've ever had since Oz was discovered. Are you glad you discovered us?" Giving her an affectionate squeeze, Ozma linked her arm through Dorothy's. "Let's see how the wizard is getting on with his tricks for the picnic." Dorothy nodded eagerly, and hand in hand the two girls hurried across the corridor to the laboratory of the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Chapter 6. A Strange Warning. The first day of the grand celebration dawned clear and bright. The Emerald City had never seemed more sparkling or fair. Flags fluttered from every tower and turret of the palace. Each house wore a garland of flowers and flaunted a dozen silken banners in the fresh spring breeze. The streets were alive with Ozma's subjects suitably costumed for the big parade, and when, shortly after noon, the royal visitors began to arrive, the castle bells broke into a joyous tolling, the 100 bands struck up the Oz national anthem, and the magnificent and beautiful floats began to swing into line. The Scarecrow's address of welcome at the city gates had been greeted with wild enthusiasm and applause, and now, happy but somewhat breathless, the indefatigable straw man mounted on the sawhorse was leading the illustrious guests into the city, where they were to join the royal procession and proceed in triumph to the west gardens of the park. What shouts and cheers went up from the happy throngs as that impressive company in their glittering coaches or riding their favorite steeds moved majestically through the emerald-studded streets of the capital. Directly following the scarecrow, all in red and wearing her tallest ruby crown, was Glinda, the good sorceress of the south, her swan-drawn chariot seeming to float by itself. Marching cheerfully after the ruler of the Quadlings came Nick Chopper, the nickel-plated emperor of the Winkies, polished to the highest degree but democratically afoot, marching in the center of his 10 splendid uniformed Winky guards. A few steps behind the Tin Woodman, and prancing along in hardly restrained exuberance, was the giant horse, proudly bearing Joe King and Queen Hyacinth, king and queen of the Gillikins. And Highboy not only carried his own head high, but he had elevated his sovereigns above everyone else in the procession, so that none could miss the happily smiling rulers of the North. A dazzling blue dragon had pulled the coach of King Cheeriobed, Queen Oran and Prince Philidor all the way from Sapphire City, and an eye-filling sight was the royal family of the Munchkins. Kabumpo, the elegant elephant, resplendent in his jeweled robes, swayed haughtily along after Cheeriobed's blue coach, waving his trunk in a dignified way to his friends in the crowd. In the canopied seat on his back rode Prince Pompadour and Peg Amy of Pumperdink, easily the handsomest young couple in Oz. Peering mischievously out the side of his gaily painted jinrikisha was the merry red Jinn himself, and no one could view the rotund little Wizard of Ev without feeling happier. Jinnicky's body was a great red jar. He wore the lid for a hat, and when he grew bored or sleepy, he would simply retire into himself like a turtle. But now he did not feel at all like retiring, and was showering ginger cookies right and left and simply beaming with interest and jollity. The King and Queen of Ragbad rode briskly along in their shabby but comfortable open coach. With them were Prince Tatters, Eartha, his flowery little princess, and Grandpa, an old soldier with a wooden leg, who had gone through many wars and hardships for the sake of his country. But the shout that greeted the Yellow Knight was loudest and longest of all. The Prince of Corumbia had lived in the Emerald City for many years as Sir Hawkus of Pokes before he was disenchanted and became the young and charming husband of Princess Marigolden of Corabia. Sir Hawkus rode the comfortable camel, and Kami, who had also spent part of his life in the capital, came in for his full share of the cheering. Princess Marigolden was mounted on Stampedro, the knight's great stamping warhorse, and Stampedro was a sight to make any little boy's heart beat faster. Atto, king of the Octagon Isles, and Samuel Salt, a reformed pirate, now royal discoverer and explorer for the crown, traveled together in Atto's octagon chariot, drawn by 8 prancing black horses with 8 footmen in 8-sided hats on the high seat behind his merry little majesty. Roger, the reed bird, perched proudly on the king's shoulder, reading out the signs and street names as they bowled merrily over the gold paving stones and chuckling to himself in 8 different languages. Last, but by no means least, came the king and queen of Sibania, the king's uncle, better known in the Emerald City as Unk Nunky, and the king's son Ojo. The king and queen were seated sedately in the silver coach of Sibania, but Ojo and his pet bear Snufferbucks were proudly mounted on the back of Roganda, queen of the unicorns. This handsome snow-white beast, who had happened to be visiting Ojo at the time, could not only send her horn darting out like a lance, but could blow it as well. The sound of its clear, bell-like notes made many a trumpeter in Ozma's band turn round with surprise and envy. Drawn up to meet her impressive visitors was Ozma herself. The royal float of her Imperial Highness was formed like a seashell. On an uncut emerald in the center sat the little ruler of all the Ozians, dressed in a shimmering white robe, wearing her flashing emerald crown, and never in all the 1,000 years of her young life had this lovely young fairy looked more beautiful. Also in white were her attendants, Dorothy, Betsy, and Trot, each wearing an emerald circlet and carrying a long wand draped with spring flowers.